because we're very excited to have Rupert back with us tonight to tell us about the latest developments on Star-Core-Zeus. So Rupert, over to you, and many thanks for coming along this evening.
Thanks, Andrew. Probably at least half of you know the story, but what I need to do is basically make an introduction, because there may be people watching a video which will never heard the story before. So basically, simple introduction is that in the 1950s, Sir Fred Hoyle proposed that the solar system didn't start from a sort of collapse of a dust cloud and then a condensation of planets, but in fact started in a binary star system, and the partner star of the sun was a massive star, probably 10 solar masses or bigger, which blew up, and then the debris became the planets. Now, Hoyle felt probably, you know, we've never found any remains of this star, so it probably blew itself away 4.6 billion years ago, never to be seen again. My position is, in fact, it's still in orbit, and there's more and more evidence accumulating. We are actually orbiting with a star-core remnant. And what I put on this first screen is to say there is evidence of a mysteriously large magnetic mass which is really perturbing our solar system, not just the Kuiper objects, but the whole thing. Okay, so I'll kick into it, and we can move from here. It's going to work. It's not working. Okay, there we go. Right, now the starting position I had was, I started looking at some Astro-Mythology and star myths. There's some rather good books on accumulating all these strange myths associated with various stars. And what I noticed was that there seemed to be strange objects like thunderbirds and dogs, like, you know, Sirius is a dog star, great eye in the sky. You hear of, you know, Eye of Horus, and it tends to be hanging around between Sirius and Orion. But when you actually look at a star map of the Northern Hemisphere, you tend to find that these stories sort of cluster in this region and make quite a credible sort of elliptical path around the North Polar regions. And this was the basis of really thinking about maybe there's something else actually in orbit. And there was also, this is also combined with a huge number of sort of astro-catastrophe stories, which suggest at different times in the past, people observed some object in the sky which also correlated with very serious environmental disaster on the Earth. So without getting into too much detail, it's all described in my book, title here, Cataclysms and Renewals. The basic synthesis is that, in fact, the solar system is in orbit with a Star-Core-Remnant, which is about 10% of the mass of the sun. It has an orbit where its aphelion, the furthest distance from the sun, is about 500 astronomical units. It actually flies in quite close to the sun before it goes away again. And in fact, its perihelion is really between Venus, the distance of the Venus orbit and Earth orbit. In addition, when it was approaching the solar system, it's coming in at it's in a very highly inclined orbit. So it's not in the same plane as the solar system. So it's coming up from ecliptic south. It crosses over about 50 AU from the sun, and then moves to ecliptic north, and then flies over the north pole of the sun, and then plunges down through the ecliptic plane. And in fact, we've got evidence it was observable by the time it was approached. Sorry, this is the track. I'm just going to see it working. This is the track that you see as an observer from Earth, of it moving from the region of space near Sirius to Betelgeuse and on up through the northern constellations. This is its present position. I'll give you the reasons why I think that's true. It's about 250 AU from the sun, and because we are located here, we've got a line of sight to it that seems to give it an apparent position between Sirius and Orion. Okay, next slide. Now, previous flybys, because this thing is, I'm saying, it's got a periodicity of about 4,000 years. So the last time it came through was in 1628 BC, when there was a major environmental catastrophe on the planet, end of the Egyptian Middle Kingdom. There were a large number of civilizations collapsed at this time. Prior to that, the previous 4,000 years flyby was actually biblical. It was the Great Flood, but the if you actually look at proper dates for dramatic events, you find that 8,000 years ago, approximately, the Black Sea formed, the English Channel formed, it separated the UK from Europe, the Persian Gulf formed all at the same time. And you go back 4,000 years again, and you find end of Ice Age, this is the Younger Dryas event. And you can go back through the ice core records to show there have been these cycles of catastrophe. Now, what I'm going to do, I hope this works, is just, this is a simple work. This is a computer model, an old computer model of a flyby. So you see it's coming in across the solar North Pole and flying down. I'll do it again so you can see. And this is the orbit of Earth, and we have a near miss. You see it goes zoom straight past. So that's basically orbital dynamics. Okay? When it was observed in 1628 BC, lots of different cultures started making pictures of basically the same sort of object. So this is a very famous sort of Egyptian winged sun, but it also appeared in Turkey by the Hittites. The Syrians were also making this image. And in fact, they were putting it in the sky next to the Pleiades. The Mycenaean Greeks had a similar type of object. It was called the axe of Zeus. The Zoroastrians in Iran, you can see this sort of winged sun thing in Persepolis, in Iran now. In the Shang dynasty, they were making images of this object here with some structure around it. This is from Easter Island. This is from Tiwanaku in Bolivia, Mayan imagery in Guatemala. We've got Mexico as well. There were actual observations. So this is the Dendera zodiac. Now, this is pretty well established. This bull here is Sirius, and this man here is Orion. And they put the Eye of Horus between the two. Now, in fact, this is on an orbital track from Sirius up to Betelgeuse. And then coincidentally, in Sardinia, there's this weird petroglyph map of Orion, which is actually upside down. And I won't explain why now. Well, I will, I'll tell you, because the Earth is upside down, but I'm not going to go into details why I think it's true. But you got this map, this Orion's map in this cave called Blue Murano on the east coast of Sardinia. And you can see this track of Zeus going up towards Betelgeuse. Okay? And separately, you see it on cylinder seals in Assyria. So these are all sort of later copies of this earlier astronomical observation. Right, now, let's go back 4.6 billion years. So we're saying what people were observing there was a Star-Core-Remnant, which is flying through the inner solar system. The origin of it is here. Oops, goes back. Sorry. The origin is here, which is this object is a 10 solar mass star. This is the sun. This is 4.6 billion years ago. And you can see it's typical binary orbits where both stars are going around the barycenter, so they're both orbiting each other. And the point about big stars is they burn up their fuel very quickly, they're unstable, and eventually they go bang. So the star blew up, all the debris was available to become the planets, and what you're left with is basically the sun now, and that dot is the hot star core. And the material around it is a supernova explosion debris. Now that could all be a nice fantasy, but we've got evidence for it. If you look at the immediate environment around the solar system in the galactic plane, this whole map is 2,000 parsecs across. It's about over 6,000 light years. What you have is this amazing sort of cartoon explosion structure. The temperatures here are measuring rarefied, very hot gases radiating X-rays, and these dark patches are dust clouds. What I'm saying is that there's an asymmetric supernova explosion. So a lot of the convective layer of the star blew off this way. Whoops, goes this way, and the star core went this way, but a huge amount of mass went in the opposite direction. So what I'm saying is a bit like a rocket exhaust. You blast something in one direction, so the star goes in the other direction. And so if you go into more detail, now this is only 1,000 parsecs. That's the recent publication, this is September 2021. They've now begun to find not only is there this hot gas, there's this dust, but there's this sort of frozen in magnetic field. It's like a sort of huge sort of magnetic sheath or tunnel that we're sitting in the middle of. Okay, and that's 1,000 parsecs. So it's like doubling the magnification. And then if we go again, this is Gaia data, we're going in higher magnification, 600 parsecs. We're still looking in the galactic plane. And you start to see the structures. You've got these clouds, which were the sort of reaction mass that made the star-core sort of blast off in this direction. But still the scale is enormous. It's good to see that. But these rarefied, there's a sort of black rarefied tunnel, which is where basically the main wave, the blast wave went. And that's the direction Star-Core went. And again, if you go up in further magnification, now we're only looking at 6.7 parsecs across, so multiply by 3-ish, you know, you're getting out to about 22 light years. The important point is Sirius is there, the sun is there. I put the Star-Core-Zeus as a little dot beside something. In fact, it's right next to it, because in fact, at 500 AU aphelion is only 0.008 light years, where Sirius is 8.6 light years from the sun. So that means that the Sirius is 1,000 times more distant than the Star-Core. The Star-Core is really quite local to us. Okay, now those are sort of maps. This is a real photograph. So this is Orion. Okay, I've got a map of Orion so you can see what you're looking at. There's a big dark hole here. This is the tunnel. This is this hot tunnel of rarefied gas. Zeus is here. The reason I'm saying that is because there's this very strange radio source, which is very mysterious, which is broadcasting quite a strong radio signal. It's one of the strongest radio signals picked up in the original Cambridge surveys in the 1950s. And so this is the overall structure. So you're looking away from Earth and the Sun towards Orion, looking down that blast tunnel. Okay? Now, again, you can check the publications. Andrew's got the original PPT. Basically, you've got all these strange structures, but the important thing to notice is there's this ring of dust. Zeus is located in the middle of it, but there are also other structures, and red is measuring hydrogen alpha. So wherever you've got high density of red, that means you've got lots of hot hydrogen. But in the tunnel itself, where Zeus is located, it's basically hydrogen free. It's actually a very, very rarefied, hot, ionized gas. Okay? Now, another point is big discussion about white dwarfs. If you look at the white dwarfs you can see, and most of them are between 1 solar mass and half a solar mass, they're quite visible because they cool down very, very slowly, because they're very small in surface area with a very high mass, so they can't lose heat very easily. However, if you have a very small white dwarf, i.e. 10% of the mass of the Sun, it has a much larger surface area and a smaller mass, so it loses heat more efficiently. And this then explains a strange phenomena. These are two different white dwarf surveys, where below about 0.2 of a solar mass, you can't see any white dwarfs. They're just invisible. You can't see them. In both these surveys, you can see there's nothing there. But there's no astrophysical reason why you can't have a white dwarf, I forgot what it's called here, electron degenerate matter, producing an object of that size. And I can show you in a moment. There is one found with Hubble. It's a much younger one. Okay, so how do we find Zeus? It's black, it's invisible, but it's a strong radio source because the original star was magnetic. And so Zeus itself is a rotating, powerful magnet, and that means it will broadcast radio frequency radiation. And so 3C161 is a powerful radio source. It's between, that's Sirius, that's Orion. It's broadcasting across the spectrum from 20 megahertz up to 5 gigahertz, probably a bigger spectrum that's measured. But it's definitely a local object, or I'm proposing it's a local object, because there's no evidence of depolarization by the galactic magnetic field. It's producing circular polarized and plane polarized radio radiation. And you see here, that's the galaxy. Now, there's another group of people who will tell you 3C161 is extragalactic. But that means it's incredibly powerful. It's like a quasar. And there's no explanation to why there's no galactic plane depolarization. Okay? And the structure of Zeus, I'm proposing, will look something like a black hole, a rotating black hole, or a neutron star. That is, you've got a torus material, jets, and you'll get radio source not you either get the radial lobes, which where those radio jets slow down, or those ion jets slow down, but you also get this synchrotron radiation from rotating material. I put this slide up because it's lovely. It looks like Van Gogh. This is the local galactic magnetic field. So here you can see it here. That's Orion. I put the stars of Orion onto this picture. And what I'm saying is that the local field is not uniform. It's got lots of kinks and wobbles in it. And there's a big kink where basically Zeus should be, which might be expected if there was quite a magnetized object in that region of the sky. Going back to what I said earlier, where precisely these radio signals coming from, the 3C161 radio signal, the most likely explanation is coming from this part of the torus, because when they've done very long baseline array analysis of 3C161, they find it's got a core region, which is about 0.3 of an arc second. It's got a torus, which is about 3 arc seconds, and a halo region, which is about 10 arc seconds. So what I think is going on, what we're looking at, is radiation coming from this region. So as the stuff whizzes around that torus, when you get line of sight, you get the synchrotron radiation coming off tangentially, and that's what we're seeing. Okay, now, if we look at that region of the sky with pan-stars and a wide field of view, again, you see this circular structure. That's Orion, that's Sirius. Huge circular structure. That is the blast tunnel from our solar system, and that's dust. 3C161, the radio source, is where that cross is. And the first thing that's really interesting is that, okay, this is that dust map I showed earlier. And so all those big fat dust clouds are in the opposite direction, and the blast tunnel is here, right? But at the same time, you're aware that the sun has a magnetic bubble, and as it flies through the galaxy, or the galactic spiral arm, it's got a sort of a solar wind tail trailing behind it. But what is very peculiar is, in fact, the tail is pointing at 3C161, pointing at this structure here. And that's weird because, in fact, it's not the anti-apex of the direction of travel. So it's like our tail is being bent by some magnetic field. Okay? And so basically what I've said here, Zeus is actually, well, I'll put it in a tiny thing there, but Zeus is sitting inside the heliotail of the solar system. Okay? And it's on a 4,000-year period orbit, and it's on the way back. And so it will actually, 3C161 will drift as it gets closer up in this direction. Now, just to go on about that, it's a nice cartoon, but this is the heliosphere around our solar system. This is the heliotail. This is data coming from IBEX spacecraft. This is the galactic magnetic field, and this is hot and cold wind that was detected by IBEX. The important thing, again, is that thing I've just shown you, that's the heliotail, is actually centered in the same region of the sky. Okay? And basically where Zeus is basically where 3C161 is. Now, this is also interesting. This is actually our motion round the galactic center. And it's easier to see what's going on. This is like the rear view mirror of your car. And you can see things are coming into it as you move away from them. And this one, the things are going out of the mirror, or the windscreen, because you're getting closer and closer. As the stars are moving away in this direction, and they're coming in this direction. Okay? Now, the solar apex is just below the Vega.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this is the sun's view, effectively, is it?
Yeah, so basically, if you're sitting, if you imagine, the sun is a Starship Enterprise, if you look out the rear view mirror, that's what you see. And if you look here, that's the front view looking out towards the direction of travel. Direction of travel is towards just below the star Vega. The way they work this out is based on the proper motion vectors, all stars you see around us. And you can work out, are they moving away in a sort of fan, or they're moving towards in a focus. Okay, so these are moving towards each other, they're moving away from each other.
So we're moving towards Vega and away from Sirius.
Correct.
Okay.
But the strange thing is is that you would expect the heliotail to actually be pointing at the solar anti-apex, that is below Sirius, but in fact is up there. It's pointing at where 3C161 is. Something bending it away from this position. Okay? And the final point I'm making in the slide is in my book, I talk about Sirius is blue shift. I don't even know this, but Sun and Sirius are approaching each other. And I think it's very interesting and still should be studied because it's a radial velocity opportunity. It means that we're traveling towards each other. That's quite unusual. Most stars are moving away from each other. And in the old data, it sort of suggested we were accelerating into a gravitational well, even though more recent data say, no, old observations were faulty, and we definitely are only traveling at minus 5.5 kilometers per second. But I think the jury's still out on that one. I think we will find there is an acceleration in that direction. There's a bloody massive object coming up in that direction. Okay, I want to show this slide simply because it's fun. But it shows you how difficult it is to work out relative velocities, because this is a whole constellation moving over not so many thousand years due to proper motion. Okay, this is the constellation of Orion, and you can see all sorts of stuff going on in this region. That's the Heliotail location, that's the Zeus location, that's Mono Sirius down there. Okay. Right, now that's the sort of beyond the solar system. Now this is our solar system. There's also very strange things are being discovered. Now, people expected the Kuiper belt object to just be like a sort of torus shape without any structure, right? But we've found it's got strange structure. You've got this weird gap here, and 60 degrees on either side of the weird gap. You've got these clusters. Now, if you know about the Trojans and Jupiter, that sort of suggests a similar sort of process. But there's nothing massive here that we know about, okay? In the same region, this is 90 degrees longitude of perihelion, that's 90 degrees from the equinox position. You find that is the location where all the objects are being scattered, they're being kicked out into very elliptical, eccentric, inclined orbits. Okay, something is interfering with Kuiper objects when they pass this region. In addition, you've got this strange clustering just before 50 AU of all the Kuiper belt objects. So there's a sort of a gap of nothing beyond 50 AU. Again, it's very hard to explain. There's some big object that's sort of cleaning up everything that strays beyond that point. And so in this model is actually real orbits of known Kuiper belt objects. That is Neptune. So that's 30 AU out to Neptune. I'm saying Star-Core-Zeus is here at the moment, inbound at 250 AU. And you can see some of these scattered objects going out all over the place because they've been, kicked like sort of golf balls with a golf club as it came in through the, and basically what's happening at 50 AU is that is where Zeus crosses the ecliptic plane as it goes from ecliptic south to ecliptic north before it flies over the top of the sun. You might have seen this in the news, actually it was literally a couple of weeks ago. At Imperial, somebody's identified this new rogue object from the old IRAS data, and they're basically, it's really to capture attention. So it might be Planet 9, maybe it is, but I think it's much more likely to be another highly scattered Kuiper belt object, which was kicked out by Zeus or Planet 9, or whatever you want to call it, that's coming in on the opposite side. Because it's basically a very high, I mean, this is 20 hours. So it's the opposite side of the sky, 20 hours right ascension, 21 hours right ascension, and 66 declination means you're way up, ecliptic north. Okay, this is very, very interesting. Okay, Zeus or something big seems to be clustering the perihelia and orbital poles of all the planets. Okay, so this is a snapshot of, this is where the Caltech position is. Prediction for Planet 9 based on all the Kuiper belt scattering. That's my prediction for Zeus based on Astro-Mythology. Just the fact that they're so close together is really interesting. Then you find just above both of them, this is where all the perihelia of the planets cluster on the ecliptic. Okay, and because the planet orbits are not perfectly circular, you get orbital poles. And the orbital poles, that's the the center of the ellipse, not the point of orbit, but the center of the orbit is basically the center of the ellipse. They all cluster basically beside the sun on the same plane as the path of Zeus, or some massive object. In addition, again, you're probably aware of this, that the sun is not, the rotation axis of the sun is not perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic, but is tilted 7.5 degrees. And it's not only tilted 7.5 degrees away from the ecliptic plane, it's also tilted in the direction where I'm predicting Zeus or objects in Planet 9, but basically it's massive objects inbound. Okay, so that's fairly strange. It's sort of big scale structure. Okay, now this is also incredibly interesting. If you look at the rotation axes of all the planets, apart from Venus, they all lean in the same direction. This is a great little video. I did this. Something called Morn 1415. Just watch this. It's so cool. So they're all leaning this way, right? Except Venus, which leans that way, a little bit. We're leaning that way, same way. So does Mars. So does even Jupiter, even a little bit. So does Saturn. Something really banged into Uranus because look, it really got knocked over in the same direction. Finally, Neptune is going in the same direction. So you can see something very large has managed to push all the rotation axes over in the same direction. They should be random. If there's no external influence, you would not expect them all to be leaning in the same direction. Okay? All right. Next question, periodicity. I basically have taken the periodicity from the climate history perturbation. So this is ice core data. It's going back about 800,000 years. This is Antarctica, but you get similar data all over all the ice cores, Greenland or Antarctica. And so basically you get this first very obvious sawtooth pattern, and the periodicity there is 120,000 years. And then we actually analyze these wobbles. They all come out around about 4,000 years. These are the most recent ones. Okay, so I'm saying that is a periodicity perturbation. I'm saying the reason our climate keeps changing is our man-made stuff is minor. I mean, we've got a bloody great object whizzing around and bumping, or not bumping into us, but definitely perturbing our planet. Okay, now let's look a bit closer at 3C161, that radio source. Okay, is it extragalactic or is it local? Right, now that's what it looks like on very long baseline array interferometry. And I'm saying basically that is a bit of the torus, so that's the synchron radiation coming towards us. And actually the torus is covering the whole thing. But the real test is to look at the wind velocity in front of 3C161, because basically any hydrogen in front of the 3C161 will have an absorption of 21 centimeters. And you can look at the Doppler shift. And basically we know the wind velocity going around the Milky Way is at approximately 200 kilometers per second. When we measured the local velocity of the solar system moving through the local arm, it's about 23 kilometers per second. But when you measure the wind velocity in front of 3C161, it's between 0 and 10 kilometers per second. So basically, whatever 3C161 is basically traveling with the solar system. It's not shining through the Milky Way and being affected by all that high-speed hydrogen whizzing around the galaxy. Okay, that's one bit of evidence it's local. The other bit of evidence it's local is that various radio sky surveys have been done over the last 50 years now, more. And the location of 3C161 keeps wobbling, and it wobbles in a very funny way because that is actually in parallel to the ecliptic plane. Okay, and I'll show you that a bit more. But basically, that sort of wobble would imply, and this is a wobble you're seeing. So, for example, you're making observations in March, or making observations in September as the Earth's on the other side of the Sun, you'll get a slightly different angle. And that sort of wobble is equivalent to an object which is only at like 270 AU. Okay. Now, I'll show that again because it's a bit hard to understand something. This is the Earth going round the Sun. And so observations you make will show these wobbles. If the thing is further away, you get a less of a wobble, right? And basically, if you look at all these radiators, I'll just merge them all together. This area of sky is equivalent to that area on the map. That's Orion. That is the ecliptic, right? Now, what you can see of these observations are basically in line with the ecliptic plane and that part of the sky. And so what it's telling you is you've very likely got a radio source which is showing local parallax shift, okay, which means it's local, it's not far away. Okay, let's look, try and see if we can see it. Okay, Pan-STARRS has done some very good all-sky pictures. And in fact, before that, the Digital Sky Survey, Mount Palomar did some very good pictures as well. And in the Mount Palomar process images, you can see some weird object sort of in the region of 3C161. Going back to this picture, can you see again, there's that big explosion debris of the tunnel where our solar system blasted out material. Okay, I'm going to run this. I'm going to zoom in, and you can see as you get closer and closer and closer to that part of the sky, you end up with something, which is this funny structure. It's not globular shaped, it's sort of maybe donut shaped. Anyway, maybe I'm over-interpreting there, but that's what is where 3C161 appears to be. Okay, I'm going to jump to something else here. Right, recently, this year, Hubble observed a binary star system with some very strange properties. And that is that here we have the parent stars, but there was this object which they're calling an exoplanet, but they worked out it's 1% the mass of the Sun. It's very likely to be a star-core or a bit of a star-core, but you can see it because it's still hot. And that also is an elliptical orbit, and that's 500 AU. So this is the sort of scales we're talking about for Zeus. Okay, so this. Here we are looking at something completely different part of the solar system, not solar system, but completely different parts of the galaxy. This is 336 light years away from Earth, but you've got something which is sort of behaving in a similar way to what I'm talking about locally to the solar system. Right. Now, again, back to a Pan-STARRS picture, that lovely circular target structure with 3C161 middle, Orion there, Sirius there. And again, if you look in the 22 micron infrared, what you're doing is looking at very cold objects. So this will be looking at something 100 Kelvin, 120 Kelvin. So it's pretty low temperature. It's not radiating light, it's radiating infrared heat. Now again, if we look at that, this region of sky, I'm going to switch to infrared in a moment. There we go. And then zoom in and see what we can see. Now we whoosh down towards 3C161 and we get this object. Now, I put this on the front of my book cover because, wow, we've got a picture of it. This is an infrared picture. And this says, unknown by Sinbad. Nobody knows what it is. It's definitely, it's an infrared source. It's sort of, seems to got some structure. And you can see the scale, that's 5 arc seconds. Right, now that was all very exciting 10 years ago whenever I found it. But I then looked at the data more carefully, and this target is 3C161, and this blob is that infrared object. Now, this is September, that's March, and it doesn't move, right? So it means that there's no parallax. There's no parallax, it means that's very far away, okay? Probably it's maybe a dust cloud from the original supernova explosion could be 300 parsecs away. I can't tell you how far away it is because you can't see the parallax. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to switch subjects because again I talk about the fact there's some evidence that Venus is a rogue planet in our solar system, and there's a recent publication in PNAS really showing that Venus is a molten planet with a few boat-like, solid bits of rock bobbing around. I mean, it's really hot still. And so I'm proposing that Venus was actually captured by the sun from Zeus only 12,000 years ago. We know Venus still has this comet tail. This is actually filmed by the European Space Agency Venus Express. The tail extends all the way to Earth. It's a very big tail. And I'm saying that just like Io is tidally heated by Jupiter, I'm saying Venus was once tidally heated by Zeus by being in a rather extreme elliptical orbit. And we do know the surface temperature of Venus is very hot. It's 460 degrees Celsius. And it's actually radiating away heat. It's cooling down. It was an incandescent red object, and it's getting cooler and less bright. It's also too hot. There's no magnetism on Venus because it's too hot for internal magnetic dynamo. Now, going back into a bit of astro-mythology, images of Hathor have this structure. This is a planetary object and some sort of cometary object around it. And in fact, this hieroglyph says that Hathor, i.e. Venus, was in the domain of Horus, which is the Egyptian name for Zeus. Moving to another culture, this is Inanna, which is the Sumerian Old Babylonian name for comet planet Venus. They said Venus was a comet. They even drew cuneiform symbols showing it was a comet. They made cylinder seals showing it was a comet. Okay, so as just 4,000 years ago, people saw Venus in the sky as a big comet. It wasn't a planet, okay? According to ancient mythology. All right, so I'll quickly run through this because it's just pure hypothesis. But so I'm saying 12,000 years ago, there was a big disaster. In fact, it coincides with the end of the Ice Age, Younger Dryas freeze. There was a big flyby. And during the flyby, somehow Venus got captured by the sun away from Star-Core-Zeus. And so when it came back again, 4,000 years later, this is Zeus coming back around, the north pole of the sun. But actually at this point, Venus is still in the same coplanar orbit, in an elliptical orbit. And in fact, the reason we always talk about Aquarius and the water carriers, because I'm saying when the flood came, it was coming from that part of the sky, from the Aquarius part of the sky. And in fact, there was probably a deluge from space. I mean, there's this idea that, there may be in that torus around Zeus a lot of water. And in fact, the Greeks always talked about the ocean and space. Okay, because what happens, when you get oxygen from, supernova explosion plus hydrogen normally in stars, you get water, lots of it. Right. Oops. Now, the more recent flyby was in 1628 BC. It's just under 4,000 years ago. And I'm saying during that cataclysm, there was another slingshot flyby, which managed to move Venus's orbit into a coplanar orbit. This is a little bit fantastic, but I'm getting somewhere with it. The reason I'm saying all this stuff is there's a big fat mystery about Venus. Well, it's called the phase lock mystery. You see, Venus and Earth are tidally phase locked, just like Moon and Earth are tidally, well, Moon is tidally phase locked with the Earth. Now, for that to happen, you've got to have a really close approach between Earth and Venus. And so I'm saying what happened was that there was some type of close encounter between the two planets, which then circularized their orbits to where they are today. And one piece of mythological evidence for this is the Aztecs talk about a time when if you saw Venus in the Pleiades at midnight, it was a really bit of bad news. The problem is it's impossible because the only time you can see Venus is in the morning and the evening because it is very close to the sun. Now it orbits much closer to the sun than we do. But for that observation to be made, it means Venus must have had an elliptical orbit where it had an aphelion heading in the direction of Sirius. No, not Sirius, no, heading in the direction, sorry, of the Pleiades. Okay. Anyway, big mystery. That's one explanation. Again, ashen light of Venus. That's another big story. That astronomers were quite convinced that you could see a red light coming from Venus when it was not reflecting sunlight. And over time, that seems to have dimmed. Okay. And recent observations have shown there's a massive amount of IR coming off the back of Venus, away from the sun side. And separately, Venus is a very reflective planet. And there is actually, there's a net loss of EM radiation, energy from Venus. So it's not global warming, it's not retaining heat from the sun, it's actually radiating heat away that's had intrinsically. Okay, and this database disproves the whole global warming. Okay, so going back to the Astro-Mythology, you can plot a course of how it's going to do on its next flyby. And so you can see it makes most of its sort of journey, you know, from 43 AU to at 2370 to like the flyby in 3 years, because the last bit is accelerating, and whoosh. And so when it flies by and drops down through the ecliptic plane, it gets quite close to Earth. It's actually dropping down between Venus and Earth, and that's when we get shaken up. And you guys have probably seen this video before, but it's always a nice one. I haven't noticed the next one first. Yeah, so the other thing is, the closer it gets, the more type of solar flares you're going to get, instability in the sun. There's a lot of magnetic coupling going on between the interplanetary magnetic field and the solar magnetic field. We are protected from these magnetic storms by our magnetic field, but unfortunately our magnetic field is getting weaker and it's wandering, so we may be more affected by solar instability over the next 300 years. And in fact, actually very recently, in July 2021, there was a huge solar flare that was sort of blasted out in the direction of Zeus. Now, back to what I was saying, this is my nice Hollywood disaster movie, so I'll run it. So you can see Zeus coming in over the north pole of the sun, and then it's coming to its perihelion point and then plunges down through the ecliptic plane, whoosh, and then we see two suns in the sky. Everything's getting bad with the sun, floods, earthquakes, you know, tsunami, huge waves. I mean, you know, the Earth wobbles. Do you know this? Because of the oblate sphere, there's a 21-kilometer difference in potential sea level. So that's very bad news for us. Right. So after the flyby, in fact, the planets get thrown into this spiral. But in fact, the sun's powerful enough, its gravity is powerful enough to collect the planets back into their normal coplanar orbits. And in fact, I can show you, that's actually what happens all the time, because basically the sun is traveling through the galaxy and it's sort of dragging all the planets along with us. And this window in the middle is what you see if you are flying, you know, you're looking like the front windscreen of the sun, looking towards Vega. This is what you see, okay? And this thing I'm saying, dawning of the age of Aquarius. This is, you probably heard the old song, you know, dawning of the age of Aquarius, but it actually comes from Babylonian astronomy, because you see, we believe in precession is a continuous process where the rotation axis of the Earth slowly processes through all the constellations around the polar region. What the Babylonians said, no, it only processes through two zodiac positions, and then there's a catastrophe and it flips back, because basically the Earth is actually tracking the inbound Zeus, magnetic Zeus, rather like a ball compass. And yeah, so that's why I have this idea of the solar, you know, age of Aquarius. Okay, very recent data. Again, this is published a month ago, I can't remember. Yeah, 2 months ago. Okay, we now, this is what I was talking about, this sort of magnetic sheath or magnetic tunnel. We can actually visualize it. You see these, all these field lines are being, these filaments that are associated with our travel through the solar system, but they also wrap around the solar system and head back towards Zeus, which is behind us. So this is, we're looking forward, Zeus is behind us, okay? And that's the star map, see relative to where we are. Okay, I'm going to change subjects now, because this has also appeared in my book. I talk about the fact the poles, the rotation, geographic rotation axis has shifted on the surface of the planet a number of times. And even though it's hard to say precisely where the pole North Pole was at different eras, it's actually quite easy to say where the equator was, because the equator is basically where you get rainforests. And there's lots of evidence now, because we've done lots of climate history analysis to show that there was a rainforest in Saudi Arabia at one point. The Amazonian rainforest has gone from Chile up to Venezuela and back again. You know, these things move around, and it's extremely difficult to explain why they're there, they're moving, unless the poles are shifting. And then you need something massive to shift poles. Now, this is all great hand-waving stuff, But there's a Nature publication that just came out where they've observed this thing, what they're calling true polar wander, which is what I'm talking about. But this is, they found it in geological record about 80 million years ago. Okay, so there's evidence of the rotation axis of the planet actually moving around. And to do that, you've got to have a huge object to make that happen. Okay? Another piece of recent evidence is there is this palace which was destroyed by a cosmic event. There's some really strange material in the explosion debris around the palace. It's also heavy metals like silver, gold, chromium, copper, platinum, nickel, iridium, diamonds. Something very large basically wiped out the surface of this region, Levant. Okay, and you find extraterrestrial materials embedded into the pottery. You find all the pottery is shattered. And another funny thing is, because again, I'm not going to go into this, but I'm saying that more than 4,000 years ago, the planet had actually been inverted in space. It was inverted 8,000 years and then reverted 4,000 years ago. So in fact, the debris plume goes from the southwest to the northeast because the planet was actually upside down. In fact, you know, the Zeus comes in from the northeast and blows any material to the southwest. Okay. Anyway, you can have a look at that one as a Nature scientific report recently. Okay, so now we all want to look for Zeus, and so you probably just heard James Webb just got delayed again. Someone dropped a spanner or something. I don't know if you heard this before. They had to delay the launch because something went wrong. Some clamp fell off or something. Anyway, so they hope they're going to launch before the end of the year. Anyway, James Webb has the potential to see Zeus. Okay, so it's got potential to see objects called 50 Kelvin, and that probably includes Zeus. Okay. Separate source of data is they're releasing more and more Gaia data. So the final release, data release 3 in 2022, has got a good chance of seeing Zeus as well. I hope you can see it in the data. Okay. And then finally, in 2025, there's the Wide Field Infra Red Space Telescope, which again is quite sensitive for cold objects. So, and has a wide field of view, so we've got a good chance of picking up inbound Zeus if it is there. But you know, we've already got that 3C161 signal, but what we really want to see is a local object traveling with it. The final one is in July. There was this big excitement. There's this huge object due in 2031. So I had a quick look at where its orbital track is. And in fact, it's perpendicular to the position of Zeus. So here's Orion, Sirius, Zeus, as you know, I've said before, but the orbital track of this object called Bernardinelli Bernstein is actually perpendicular to Zeus. So it might have been kicked out. It might not have been kicked out. It may not be associated with Zeus, but I'm just giving you that information. And actually, the dark energy camera that picked up this object would have been great to find Zeus. But the problem is I've only looked at this region of the sky, and that's where I think Zeus is. I've never actually covered the region of the sky where I think Zeus is located. Okay, so everybody, we've got to the end. So what I'm saying is that nice picture on the front cover of my book is probably a cloud of material which is much, much further away and could be the remains of the supernova explosion plume that blew away in that direction from the solar system. But basically, this big object is not directly connected to 3C161. 3C161 is in front of this great big infrared cloud. Okay, so there we have it. So thank you very much.